The Israeli army has retrieved the bodies of 6 hostages from Khan Yunis in southern Gaza. These are the pictures of the men who had been captured in southern Israel during the Hamas attacks on October the 7th. 5 of their deaths had already been announced, but 1 was previously thought to have still been alive. Meanwhile, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been in Egypt, where he is pushing for a ceasefire and hostage release deal in Gaza. He's met the Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi in Cairo. Antony Blinken has said it was up to Hamas to agree to a bridging proposal for a ceasefire deal in Gaza after he met Israeli officials in Tel Aviv. Hamas has issued a statement saying claims by the US, including President Biden, that it was backing away from a ceasefire deal are misleading. Hamas says it's keen to reach a cessation of aggression, and remarks by the US administration give Israel the green light to continue the war. Hamas also accused the US of bias towards Israel. Let's show you the latest pictures we have from Gaza, where Hamas officials say at least 10 people have been killed in an Israeli military attack on a school that was housing displaced people. The IDF claimed that the strike targeted Hamas fighters who used a hidden command center in the school. The UN says almost 500 school buildings have been directly hit or damaged during the current conflict. Well, let's hear now from Sahiro Shahamur. He's been speaking about his uncle, Abraham Munda. He was taken hostage by Hamas fighters on October the 7th.
My uncle was kidnapped from his house, from his home in Kibbutz Nir Oz on that Saturday by Hamas terrorists. This happened October 7th. On October 8th, he was abandoned by his government. And on October 9th, he was abandoned by his government. And on October 10th, and this continuously went on until the day that he died. He saw television and heard some radio broadcast. I'm sure that he heard what is going on in Israel. It must have broke his heart to see that, people from his own government are objecting to sign a deal that will get him back home. So yeah, Hamas took him, but the continuous abandonment is on the hands of the Israeli government. They had plenty of opportunities to get him out, together with all the other hostages, together with in so many cases. We have counted 18 cases of the government of Israel torpedoing the initiative to get the hostages back. 18 in the last 10 months.
Well, on those talks, Antony Blinken, as I mentioned, is in Egypt. Travelling with him is our State Department correspondent, Tom Bateman.
Well, the intention of Secretary Blinken is to try to drive this deal through. We've had a fair amount of expectation mixed with optimism from the Americans about their hopes for trying to push some form of breakthrough. They have thought within even the next week or so. I have to say the mood on the ground as we've moved from Israel here to Egypt simply hasn't matched that expectation. What we heard from Secretary Blinken on Monday night was him saying that Prime Minister Netanyahu had accepted the American bridging proposal. The language from the Israelis themselves has been a bit less emphatic than that, although the Israeli Prime Minister saying that he was committed to this proposal. But some suggestions within the Israeli press that this has been perhaps more mediation or negotiation between the Americans and the Israelis to get to a position than it has been between the Israelis and Hamas so far. The purpose here in Egypt, critically, is to discuss perhaps the main sticking point, and that is Prime Minister Netanyahu's insistence, as he's put it, that there remain Israeli troops in the so-called Philadelphia corridor, that part of the Gaza Strip in the south that borders Egypt here. He believes that's essential to Israel's security, so that there can't be weapons smuggling for Hamas to rearm itself. As for Hamas, they say that simply amounts to continued Israeli occupation, and therefore it is not an end to the war. The Egyptians are critical on this because, of course, they share that border with Gaza. That will be a key component of the discussions between Mr. Blinken and President Sisi here. And then we move to Qatar, where there will be further discussions with key officials in Doha. They, of course, like the Egyptians, crucial to the negotiations and speaking directly to Hamas.
Tom Bateman there, as he was saying, Qatar absolutely critical when it comes to these talks. So let's get the perspective now of Nawaf Al-Thani, who is former Director of Qatari Defence Intelligence, joining us from Doha. Always good to have you with us. Who at this point is holding up this ceasefire?
Thank you, Lucy, for having me. Well, currently, I think what's holding up the ceasefire is that the negotiation isn't over. We've seen reports that Israel agreed on bridging proposals, and then, as you reported earlier, the Israeli media kind of poked some holes into that. Obviously, the attacks today on the evacuation center, as I see the numbers in front of me growing to 12 killed, doesn't help that that news happened and that thing happens in the same day. As well as Hamas. Hamas has to understand that it won't get everything it needs. And I think Qatar's job with the United States and Egypt is to focus both parties on three main points. Number one, the end of hostilities and a ceasefire. Number two, release of all hostages per a plan that agreed by both parties. And number three, humanitarian aid. Making the perfect the enemy of the good will neither help the Israelis or the hostages or the Palestinians and the civilians in Gaza.
But on that first point, how will it ever be overcome when Israel wants to have a deal that will allow it to continue the war, whereas it seems that Hamas wants a ceasefire deal that ends it?
Well, that's the point. If Israel wants a deal without a deal, that is by definition a non-deal. A lot of Palestinians are suffering. The families of the hostages, the Israeli hostages, are suffering. I think the Israelis and the Palestinians represented here by Hamas in Gaza have to reach the understanding that they won't get everything they want. They won't get a perfect solution, but a bridging solution that could lead to a further peace negotiation should be the goal. We're way past a perfect solution. That was months in the past. Now the whole region is trying to avert a regional conflict and stop more death and destruction for Gaza and hopefully return the hostages.
We have seen this optimism, though, expressed by Antony Blinken and the US team. It has not been echoed by any of the other parties. How would you say you feel at this moment? Are you optimistic that any kind of deal can be reached?
I think by nature that we hadn't have this of an advance as per the reports that we're getting in months, just by that fact, I am a bit optimistic, but very cautiously optimistic, because an optimism in today's atmosphere and today's reality is different than optimism a year ago. Today we have to be optimistic while enduring continuous death in Gaza. Today 35 killed in Gaza, and the number unfortunately is going, possible widening conflict. So that type of optimism is, I think, what the the mediators have and what I have. And I think in the next couple of days, we will see if that optimism was well placed or, unfortunately, another opportunity has slipped between our fingers.
Nawaf Al-Thani, it's always good to have your thoughts and have you with us. Thank you for joining us from Doha.
Thank you.